We start with that race-changed and gender-flipped Robin Hood character from ancient English folklore, waffling on about how much she hates a local sheriff to her baldy boyfriend who she just shagged real good last night. When suddenly, said local sheriff turns up and says you've all got 24 hours before your flats become private property, and we're going to turf you all out like a smelly tramp in your local Weatherspoons. After a final round of neon cringe opening titles, the gang are all packing up to leave, given that evil white capitalist John Prince has finally got Bill 121 through and now owns the Sherwood Towers. But Robyn says stop being a bunch of cucks and listen up, son. Because we've got to fight for this place and can't give up our homes to the white man just because he legally purchased the deeds and stuff. Later, hot totty lawyer mate Marion turns up and totally apologises for lying to her client's daughter and for using her to try and bring down John Prince, given he indirectly killed her kind of crooked daddy. And so she's found a whole treasure trove of secret data on that USB stick which she stole from Prince's office, but he's too much of a mogadon to understand any of it. And I can totally relate, because I kind of feel like that every time I try and fill out my tax returns every year. No! Anyway, she technically uses Robyn again to get to her mate Tuck, given he's about the only one who might be able to help understand what the data is all about. But unfortunately, he's a mogadon too, and also can't make head nor tail of the financial nonsense. And poor Tuck is still pretty butthurt about the sheriff cutting out his magnetic sensors and his fingertips, what he uses to feel his machines on a deeper level. And before you can say, maybe that's for the best, you kinky creep, they realise they've come across damning evidence. Cause of a shocking twist, what no one could ever see coming. Turns out the local property developer has bought up a bunch of local properties to develop.
No way!
Yes way. But apparently, Johnny Boy's been buying up half the city using fake shell companies all around Sherwood, and now they totally have all the incriminating records and shit. Later, Tressie comes home and finds 5 jobless losers in animal gimp masks in her flat. And before she can say, I didn't know the annual furry convention was in town, the Hood asks her to help them fight for the Sherwood estate and totally preserve the community spirit, what she's always banging on about. But naturally, she wants nothing to do with 5 anonymous gimps in shit masks and cheap raincoats, until the main one lifts up their hood and reveals her super secret identity. And in another shocking twist, what Tressie could totally never see coming. Turns out her own daughter, who's always suspiciously absent whenever the naughty Hood lot are off causing carnage and kidnapping people, was secretly the leader of the local crime syndicate all along.
Get out of here. Get out of here, man. Shit, I'm saying.
And she soon bollocks poor Robyn for lying and doing a bunch of crime in the local neighbourhood, despite the Caucasian officials just looking for an excuse to clamp down on ethnic minority folks around here, and says you need to get your act together before you're shot up at all, because there ain't enough room in this flat for 2 Ironside cosplayers. But she eventually relents, and soon gives a rousing speech in the local community hall, galvanising the residents into staying put and taking a stand with her. And I assume she meant that figuratively, given her legs are now floppier than my middle-aged Woody on date night. So the gang figure out a plan to fortify the towers, so they can hold up for a while and get a message out to people about all the bad things going on over here. Mudge then gives Robyn a brand new fancy bow what she made while slacking off in her garage while she was supposed to be working on fixing motors for her Asian boss. Whilst back upstairs, Tressie is visited by another black intruder in her flat, and this time in the form of that deaded Lionheart fella. And she just can't believe she's now having to put up with casual hauntings by ghosty ghouly spooks on top of the threat of being made homeless by the local filth. Some shit. Speaking of ghosty ghouly spooks, the scrawny sheriff with a body so pasty she's almost fucking transparent totally shags her junior officer again for shits and giggles. Whilst elsewhere, the compromised Asian mayor meets Maid Marion on a small bench, and is soon shown evidence detailing all of John Prince's naughty property dealings what he's been trying to hide for years, and so she totally wants her to prosecute him and stuff. And before I can say, surely a qualified legal professional should know that unlawfully obtained evidence is inadmissible in court, especially since you totally broke into his house and stole it from his private computer, she's soon confronted by said John Prince fella and probably taken away for questioning. And once back at his penthouse, what keeps being broken into by a gang of teens in colourful pack-a-macs, John tells Marion that she'll soon end up like her daddy if she don't stop interfering in his naughty schemes, and promptly takes her phone and smashes it into a million pieces to try and destroy all the evidence she's stolen from him. Because I guess he's kind of a boomer when it comes to technology, and has never heard of digital documents being automatically backed up to the frigging cloud and shit. Meanwhile, loved up Robyn and Little John rub foreheads for some reason, before Tuck bursts in and says there's a problem, and he don't just mean how he accidentally slipped and fell on his own hair clippers again. Anyway, turns out he placed a tracking app on Marion's phone before it got smashed up by a billionaire with piss poor dancing skills, and has totally seen her get kidnapped by the city CCTV cameras. And given Prince allegedly tried to have her mum killed for annoying him with nuisance protests and also killed Marion's dad because reasons, Robyn tries to rush off to save her. But little Jonathan says, "You've got too much to do here trying to fend off a freckly ginger, so I'll totally volunteer to go save my lesbo love rival, even though it'd work out in my favour if I just let Prince take her out already." So he heads down to the tunnels whilst the sheriff jams the outgoing comms and promptly storms the towers. And after the sheriff gets pepper sprayed for just doing a freaking job, Robyn uses her fancy new bow to shoot a gas arrow into the gaff, whilst Tuck soon counters the jamming signal and enables Tressie to do a live stream, and to get the message out about how a rich white capitalist legally bought the property they live in and now wants to redevelop it into nicer condos and stuff. Back at the penthouse, billionaire John Prince, who's always been pretty fair and reasonable up till this episode, randomly goes full cartoon villain and boasts about how he's about to own all the properties around Sherwood and now plans to flood the land inside the area by breaking the levees and thus getting rid of the pesky plebs. And so he can have a massive ye olde moat around his giant empire like back in the old days and shit.
Okay.
So naturally, Marion swipes a small butter knife and totally threatens the homicidal honky, but is soon disarmed by security and given a taste of her own medicine. And it looks like it's curtains for young meddling Marion who couldn't just leave well enough alone even after realising how these shady shenanigans led to her father's death. But luckily, little Jonathan turns up just in the nick of time to save his lesbo love rival, as she then warns her would-be murderer not to go after her, given she's got all these incriminating documents backed up on the cloud, and so just walks off and presumably letting him carry on with his plan to drown hundreds of her proletariat friends.
What?
Whilst back in Sherwood, Tressie gets a visit from a seventh intruder in her home today, and turns out it's that trigger-happy copper what crippled her ass back in the first Debbie. And after he has a total meltdown and tries to finish the job by killing her real good and proper, he gets shot in the left buttock by a pissed-off Robyn. 'Cause smacking up raspberry ripples in small wheelchairs just ain't fucking on, son. And after engaging in a bout of fisticuffs, the copper beats the snot out of our stunning and brave heroine, and soon openly brags about how he's going to kill Tressie and frame the hood for it on orders of the local sheriff. Unfortunately though, his would-be victim has totally caught his confession on camera, and he now feels like a right mug for accidentally live streaming his naughty crimes, before Robyn twats the fucker with a cookie jar full of condoms.
Nice.
And after Tuck broadcasts the tape confession all over the internet and makes the sheriff's police force look like total mugs for the 8th week in a row, she pays a visit to the dopey officer what just screwed them all harder than he screwed her earlier, and soon wakes up looking for revenge after being twatted by Johnny Jar. But again, unfortunately, she also goes full cartoon villain out of nowhere and totally kills him. Whilst back in the towers, the Loxley family clean up the flat and totally celebrate somehow beating the sheriff by just throwing a bunch of condoms at the local filth who just seem to drop their eviction order because reasons. As they then proceed to all have a little boogie, which hilariously includes Tressie spinning her wheels to the main title theme.
Notice that I run this hood, run this hood, run this hood. You know we run this hood.
And after Marion turns up to cry and whine about almost dying today, and apparently not even warning anyone about John Prince's plan to drown them all by bursting the banks of the local river, she soon has another saucy smooch with her client's daughter. But also, unfortunately, little Jonathan catches them both in the act, and he's pretty conflicted about it, to be fair. Because although he's now officially second fiddle to a small legal lesbian, he's also now got a right rated lob on. And then wonders whether a chocolatey threesome might be on the table tonight if he just plays his cards right. Meanwhile, the Asian mayor soon confronts billionaire John Prince and tells him the deal's totally off now there's rumours of dodgy dealings going on with his business ventures. But he says he'll just have to run for mayor himself to get his scheme back on track, and says he'll have her job within a year. But she just scoffs, Because a straight white male with a fuck ton of privilege ain't got a chance in hell of winning in a super woke Canadian district against a female minority lady of Asian descent, so he can just bring it on, son. And we end with a freckly ginger sheriff, who's now a straight up naughty murderer killer, doing a press conference about the tragic death of the officer, what she was secretly shagging on the side, and says the hood was the ones what did it, and are totally now wanted for murder and shit. And that's it. That's the final epi. Though my favourite part, of course, was when the local filth got smacked across the skull with a condom jar, and bringing a whole new meaning to being fucked in the head. But anyway, thank God all that's over with, because that's a plot and that's your lot. Considering that bell thing so you don't miss any future recaps, including the roast of season 2 of this show if Canadian execs go full tard and this insulting mess is somehow renewed next year.
Oh, good lord!
Tell me if you like this series in the comments if you have time, and I'll see you in the next one.
Pull up in this mess that we be robbing. We be robbing. We be robbing. You think it's a game, but really it's not. Show it in force, becoming it hot.